Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're embarking on a massive, literally cinematic, 15,000-year deep time journey that is going to completely reframe everything you thought you knew about American history. So often, we start the clock of this continent story just a few centuries ago. But today, we're looking at the untold origins of this land, beginning way before the concept of the United States ever even existed. We're tracing this epic narrative all the way from a frozen, prehistoric landscape right up to the dawn of political independence. It is just an incredible story of human resilience, engineering, and cultural collision. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, forging an Ice Age continent. Then, the rise of ancient civilizations. Moving into the first European explorers, followed by colonization and cultural collision, and finally, the birth of the United States. All right, let's start right in with part 1, forging an Ice Age continent, the 15,000-year foundation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale we're dealing with. I want you to mentally erase all the modern cities and highways and just imagine stepping into a frozen world. We're talking massive glaciers, miles thick, and lower sea levels exposing this vast, expansive land. Looking at our timeline here, we have the first humans crossing the Bering Land Bridge well over 15,000 years ago. Then, around 13,000 years ago, the Clovis culture peaks. We don't even get to Christopher Columbus until 1492, and that famously celebrated 1776 date, it's just a tiny, microscopic sliver at the very right edge of the timeline. The true history of America is unfathomably deeper than what's typically taught. So, who actually were these earliest pioneers? Well, among the most well-known are the people of the Clovis culture. These early North American hunter-gatherers were absolute masters of survival. They're renowned in the archaeological record for these really distinctive fluted stone tools, which were literally perfect for hunting massive Ice Age megafauna, like mammoths. But honestly, their greatest asset was their adaptability. These resilient early humans didn't just barely survive, they thrived, spreading across a harsh, newly formed, and wildly diverse continent over thousands of years. Moving right along to part 2, rise of ancient civilizations, engineering, trade, and megacities. As the ice eventually retreated and the climate warmed up, human societies evolved rapidly. We see a massive shift from nomadic bands to complex, monumental societies that completely transform how we understand the ancient American landscape. Just look at the breathtaking innovations of the Adena and Hopewell cultures in the eastern part of the continent. They established extensive trade networks spanning thousands of miles, moving copper, shells, obsidian. They used advanced farming and agriculture to sustain growing populations. They engineered monumental earthworks and mounds requiring massive, highly coordinated labor forces, and the whole shebang was tied together by rich, complex spiritual and religious practices. This was a highly dynamic, advanced way of life. Now, moving further west into the American Southwest, the engineering feats become just as mind-blowing, even if they're entirely different in style. The ancestral Pueblo people engineered incredible multi-story cliff dwellings directly into the harsh, vertical desert rock. Seriously. Think about the sheer architectural genius and determination required to build enduring stone structures in such an unforgiving, arid environment. They totally mastered their ecosystem, building sprawling complexes that still inspire awe today. But when we talk about population centers, there is one statistic that always stops people in their tracks. 20,000. 20,000 people. That is the estimated peak population of Cahokia, the largest ancient city in North America, which was located right near modern-day St. Louis. And this brilliantly illustrates the scale of what we're talking about. If you compare Cahokia, with its tens of thousands of residents, towering earthwork pyramids, and its status as a central trade hub, to 12th century London, you are looking at a very similar population scale. Both were massive. Bustling regional capitals shaping the world around them, they just had distinct architectural and cultural expressions. Native American achievements were absolutely on a global scale of urbanization. Which brings us to part 3, the first European explorers. A new chapter begins. For millennia, this vast continent was exclusively inhabited, managed, and cultivated by diverse indigenous peoples. But as that isolation ends, it kind of forces us to challenge a standard assumption: who actually discovered America? Now, obviously, the indigenous populations had discovered, settled, and built empires on the land thousands of years prior, but from a European perspective, history books usually point to one guy in 1492. The historical reality, though, is quite a bit more complex. Because here's the historical plot twist. It was actually the Norse. Viking explorer Leif Erikson led maritime expeditions that successfully reached North American shores centuries before Columbus ever even set sail. They actually established a temporary settlement at Lons Omedos in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. So European contact actually occurred far earlier than many people realize. Let's move to our timeline and see how this builds. We have Leif Erikson reaching North America around 1000 AD. Then, there is a staggering gap of nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus arrives in 1492. That is half a millennium between the first Viking footprints on the continent and the actual beginning of widespread, sustained European exploration. All right, part 4, colonization and cultural collision, worlds collide. Once widespread European exploration really takes root, we enter a highly complex era. Colonization was absolutely not some single unified effort by Europe. Different powers arrived with entirely different motivations. The Spanish focused heavily on the south and southwest, largely driven by wealth and religion. The French moved into the north and Midwest, primarily motivated by the lucrative fur trade and commerce with local tribes. The Dutch settled parts of the East Coast, focusing on mercantile trade, while the English, also focusing on the East Coast, leaned heavily toward long-term permanent settlement and territorial expansion. Naturally, the arrival of all these varied colonial powers led to an inevitable, profound collision of cultures. This era was marked by intense competition for vital resources. It saw the introduction of new global technologies that changed daily life and warfare forever. But at the core, there are just fundamentally differing ideological views on land ownership. European powers generally viewed land as a commodity to be claimed and fenced, which contrasted sharply with many Native American communal views of land stewardship. And this dynamic led to profound, generation-defining struggles, resulting in widespread displacement and a permanently reshaped demographic and geopolitical map. And finally, Part 5, Birth of the United States, the culmination of deep time. So the crucial point is how all these converging forces, the shifting of power and those deeply rooted colonial settlements, inevitably pushed toward a breaking point. Once European colonies, particularly the English, establish firm generational roots, massive tensions rise over governance, taxation, and resources. This friction reaches a boiling point, the American Revolution ignites, and a brand new nation declares its independence on the world stage. Which lands us on this incredibly famous number, 1776. But having gone through this entire explainer, our perspective on this date has completely shifted, right? We really shouldn't view 1776 merely as a beginning anymore. Rather, it's an incredible milestone. It is the political culmination of 15,000 years of human history, adaptation, civilization building, trade, and profound cultural collision on this very continent. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. How does knowing the 15,000-year deep history of America change your understanding of the nation today? When you realize the immense depth of the civilizations, the sheer scale of the engineering, and the complex struggles that occurred on this land for tens of thousands of years before a single colony was even founded, it completely changes the lens through which we view our modern reality. It gives our history a much richer, deeper context. Think about that next time you look at a map of this continent. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.